we understand that so many, quote, truths come up, they're shown to us by the medicine.
Yeah.
Yet it's really sharpening the intuitive sword in the ceremony with the work we've done before.
Yeah.
That allow us to have our soul tell us what's really true or not. That's the deep question when it comes to medicine.
Yeah, so it's a very complex issue because, first of all, until a person actually knows how to access their soul, they can't tell the difference between their soul and their mind. And the mind is actually inherently part of the soul. So the soul is not as simple as people think. The soul's got levels to it. Without giving you a long expose of the soul, but in a nutshell, I use Steiner's model of the soul because I found it to be very complete. Steiner says anything with an inside and an outside has a soul, which begins at an atom. So in Steiner's model, souls have atoms, and anything that is not biological, like a plant or a living organism or a human being, has a mineral soul. So his class, the soul begins as a mineral soul on this planet. Then, through the process of biological life, everything that emerges from the mineral kingdom, i.e., single-celled organisms, for example, in the ocean, have a biological soul. So the biological soul now is not only regulating energy and information in form. A rock has form, the planet has form, sodium chloride is a molecular combination of atoms that makes sodium chloride, right? So there you see there's form. That's why you can recognize the sodium chloride molecule, and chemicals can give you, a chemist can draw it out for you. But then you go to the biological soul, and so each level of the soul gets more complex, and it can transfer more energy and information because it's actually beginning to have a more comprehensive, shall we say, thinking process. Awareness process would be a more accurate term. Even a single-celled organism has awareness of what it wants to eat and what it needs to survive, so it moves towards food. If you look at basic biological texts, they say a cell moves towards pleasure and avoids pain, and pleasure is the right temperature or the right environment for it to thrive, and pain is anything that threatens its survival. And so that's the very basis of our what's called the negative bias, which is our nervous system's constant looking for threats in the environment, because at the biological level, that's a reality for survival. So the biological soul then evolves in the human being and in some primates and dolphins and whales and creatures that have enough brain power to the intellectual soul, which is then the soul's growing its own mind. In other words, a plant is fused in what's called a group soul. Most animals are in a group soul. So there's like the soul of all lions is guiding all the lions. A lion doesn't have an individual sense of self like you or I do. All lions have this very same desires and drives, and they don't have personality biases. In other words, they don't have egos. Mm-hmm. They have the ego of the animal itself, but that's part of the group soul because it's living through all the lions. You could find a correlate for that in a human being, but it would just be a correlate because we all have egos and a sense of individuality. And you can tell that we have that because we do things that are destructive to ourselves. You don't see lions, for example, shooting up crack or killing so much that there's nothing to eat one day, right? They're very tuned, and they're actually part of nature. So
there's a symbiosis.
There's a symbiosis, mm-hmm. and they don't go against that because it's inherently woven into the fabric of lionness, just like wolves and birds and bees have birdness and beeness. But if you give a human ego to any one of those creatures, it all of a sudden can start doing things that are very destructive to itself and to life itself, because it doesn't really have a context for determining, neither do humans at lower levels of consciousness, when it's actually destroying its own survivability, right? So the intellectual soul is really the beginnings of an ego. And the intellectual soul means any idea that the person can access and use or remember. So all of our childhoods are the beginning, from the very time we emit the word I or no, that's when the ego is forming. That shows that the child is now differentiating itself from mother, father, food. If mommy sticks a fork in the child's mouth with roast beef and it doesn't want it, it'll say no and push the hand away. It's now aware for the first time that it is not the roast beef and it is not mommy, and it can have a choice, so it pushes it away. That's the beginning of the intellectual soul. Prior to that, it's a biological organism, so it lives like an extension of its mother.
This is like a half beast, half spirit.
Well, yeah, if you want to say it that way, I can see what you're saying. Without dissecting that, we'll go forward, otherwise I'll get into a segue. So the intellectual soul matures to the development of what's called the awareness soul. And you'll see I'm going to tie all this into your question, because I'm not just going sideways.
I enjoy the Chek roundabouts. I think we all like this, man.
Cool.
Yeah.
My students often do, unless they're too left-brained, and then they don't. But I say, well, that's your medicine. Pay attention to the stories.
That's right. Be patient.
Yeah. There's a reason you asked me to teach you. So the awareness soul emerges the day we begin to question the validity of our own thoughts. So so there you have classic Byron Katie, right?
Is that true?
Is it really true? How do you feel when you think that thought? Can you turn it around, right? So the day that we realize we don't have to be a Christian, or we question, am I really going to burn in hell for doing such and such, or is God really an old man in the sky with a bad attitude keeping track of everything, or is it true that my father doesn't love me? And the list is long, right? So really, once we begin honestly questioning our own thoughts against the reality that we see, experience, and live, and what's all around us. In other words, questioning our thoughts to find ways to live more fully and be more connected and have less stress and less fear. We have to essentially put these ideas on the scale of truth within ourselves, and the ones that weigh us down and make us feel more disconnected and less capable of experiencing giving and giving love, those are the ones that have to be run through what I call the mind flip process. So I developed a system that I use, which is first identifying what your dream is. So whenever someone goes into a medicine ceremony that I've trained, I always say, what is your intention or your dream for the journey? That becomes your compass. So then you have a thought like, I'm evil, or I'm a rapist, or I'm a murderer, or I have been a murderer. And so using the awareness soul and growing the awareness soul says, okay, my intention for this journey was to be as loving and as whole a human being as I can. Does buying into I'm a murderer, I'm a rapist, even if it's true, bring you the capacity to be more loving and whole? No. So even if it was true, what would you do with it right now? So then you have to flip the coin. You just saw the negative, the tails. It does not get you to your dream. So you flip it over. Well, if I was a rapist or a murderer, now I realize how much I love life and how much I love human beings. And I realize that I have that dark potential within me, but I don't have to act it out unconsciously. Now, if you put your awareness there and your intention there, if that was a kite, it's flying straight towards your dream. But if you go with the other one and you believe it just because it came up in your thoughts, now you're going in a downward spiral, and it's going to incite more fear and more separation, and you're going to be very afraid to talk to people about what you saw on that journey.
Yeah.
So now you have to conceal more, which means you're growing more shadow.
So is it a choice of, in that moment of decision, indulgence in the thoughts that have no corollary to the dream? It's an indulgence. It's almost like a junk food for the mind that's not aligned with the dream.
Well, a lot of this is all stuff that's trapped in your unconscious, but that's why it's called the unconscious, because you don't know it's there. You see, whenever you enculturate human beings, you set a consensus norm. So, like tonight, if it starts raining and you decide you want to go dancing out in the foyer there, in the courtyard, naked, and singing, that'll go really well until someone looks out their window and sees Josh dancing naked.
Yeah.
And then they might call the cops. Why? Because that's out of the consensus norm. And so therefore, they're going to look at you as though you're some kind of a nutcase or you're a drugger, or they're going to have some, they're going to check to see if you're out of your mind on something. But, so they do the blood test, they find out you're normal. They say, well, what the hell were you doing? And you say, I simply am celebrating life. It's beautiful. And there's plants and trees out there, and it's important for me to be honest about who I am. Well, what do they do with a guy like you, right? Okay, so he wasn't drunk, he wasn't stoned, he was simply enjoying life. But the problem is if everybody starts doing that, well, people will be having way too much fun, and nobody knows what to do with that level of connection in a culture that's this entangled in its own shadow. So, and is full of Christian values. I mean, this is a Christian culture. So essentially what I'm saying to you, you have gone out of the consensus norm. But the sad part of it is almost every spiritual master, every great mind, every genius, every pioneer of anything is out of the consensus norm, right? When I first started introducing Swiss balls to the gym industry, people looked at me like I was a moron, told me I was gay, called me all sorts of names, and basically attacked me. And I used to toy with them and say, oh, well, if you're such a frickin' superhero, then come over and do what I just did. And none of them could do it. And then they all of a sudden had this awe of reverence, like after they fell on their head. How did you do that? Like I used to do front squats with 135 pounds on top of Swiss balls for reps. And they would you make it look so easy. It's because I practice. Try standing on it. Well, they couldn't even kneel on the damn thing. But the point is, I got attacked for years, but now there's people all over the world. I walk into the gym, they don't know who I am. They don't know I'm the guy that frickin' brought the concept in, and then the trainers come and tell me I'm doing dangerous stuff on a Swiss ball. And I'm like, you think?
So the truth goes through opposition, especially when the truth is profound.
Exactly.
Profound truths
and
go
the
through opposition.
more profound it is, the more of departure it is from the consensus norm. So to get back to the medicine issue, whenever you're indoctrinated into any culture, and this goes all the way back into tribal societies, you have to be indoctrinated into their mythology. And whether they are conscious of their myth does not matter. Our myth today is consumerism. It's scientific, materialistic consumerism. So what we do today is, because we don't have an effective myth, we don't have effective ways to connecting to source or soul. Everyone has to go through a church or through a temple or through a Bible or through a rabbi or through a priest, which is Middle Ages, outdated, antiquated mythology. So because our myth is outdated, it's causing lots of problems in our culture, which is a culture is a bunch of people doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. Arnold Mandel's definition of culture. So what happens is, by the time somebody comes to do a ceremony, they have all this repressed material. And what happens is, when you're enculturated, so dancing in the rain becomes a taboo. But what if you love dancing in the rain? Well, now you have a choice. Dance in the rain and just risk dancing in the rain, i.e. risk going into the gym with a big colored ball. Or you say, I'm afraid to do that because I might get in trouble. Well, then you say, I want to do art, but I want to paint naked people having sex. Well, the first time you do that in school or in class or show that to your mother, oh my God, what are you doing? Don't you ever paint something like that. They'll probably tear it up right in front of you, burn it, and spank you. Well, now you're afraid to touch color and paint anymore, but inside of you is a Picasso, metaphorically. So now you're carrying all this guilt and shame, but there's a part of you that's so in love with expressing itself creatively that you can't express. Well, that's buried down in your shadow. Then you start going through puberty, and you've got an erection every 3 hours that's so stiff you could use it as a dinner bell, and you touch that thing and alleviate. One day you find out all of a sudden this thing releases a big wave of fluid, and it makes you feel fantastic, and someone catches you doing that. Now you're going through another one. Now you've got the burnt art and the penis and the whole dancing in the rain. Well, all I have to say is, if you understand the fact that the human being is the most creative creature we've ever come across, with a tremendously powerful brain that has more neural synaptic connections than there are stars in the known universe, And you realize how much we're repressing to fit into a socially contrived ideal that's largely controlled by religious dogma and political objective. What do you see? You see the greatest minds are the ones that are the furthest out of the culture and the ones that are the most attacked. And so by the time someone gets to a medicine ceremony, they got years of repression. Their artistic instinct is repressed. Their sexual instinct is repressed. Their creative instinct is repressed. And if it hasn't been repressed, it's usually only been able to be expressed within the narrow confines of what is acceptable, largely based on parental programming and their immediate social milieu, or what you might call their tribe or extended tribe or their group. Then we don't have any effective systems at large for dealing with sexual trauma, emotional trauma, parental abuse, which is very, very high if you read the
Gabor Mate.
Gabor Mate, yeah. or another very deep one, even deeper, and not, that's a fantastic book. By no discredit to that book, but if you read The Body Keeps the Score by
Bessel van der
Kolk,
yep.
Then you start seeing how much violence there is in families, in military families, and Catholic families are some of the most violent I've ever seen, paradoxically. How's that for... And then all the sexual abuse in the church, right? So there's the shadow manifesting itself.
Yeah.
And what do? They label it the devil so they can externalize it and somehow convince themselves that nothing that is labeled evil or of the devil could ever come from God, which... Wait a minute, that means there's two gods, right? People that are at that level of consciousness can't even do basic math, right? So without getting segued into that, but do you see what I'm showing you? By the time the average person makes it to their first legitimate shamanic ceremony with plant medicines that basically make the ego porous, so the unconscious just flows right up like a fountain, and everything you've been stuffing down for your whole life now is dancing live in your perceptual field of awareness. And because it's inside of you, and because it's real, and not only that, when the medicine, depending on the dose, not only do you go into your personal unconscious, you go right into the collective unconscious. Once you get past about 4 grams of mushrooms and you start climbing up from there, you can break through the personal unconscious into the collective unconscious. I've done 13 grams of mushrooms, and I've done 9 hits of LSD, and I've done numerous very intense DMT and ayahuasca ceremonies. And so I've actually been into a state of psychosis, and I've hired people to watch over me specifically to make sure that I don't hurt myself or do anything, because I felt as a pioneer, before I was going to start leading people in healing ceremonies, I had to take a tour of the hell they walk through, and I also needed to take a tour of the heavens that people walk through, so that I could be conscious of what kind of an experience a person can have at different doses and what happens when you combine different medicines. So I spent several years taking a medicine and upping the dose 1 notch at a time until I hit psychosis. And I would keep careful notes, and even in the journeys I'm taking notes and drawing pictures of the dimensions I'm in and where I'm at. And I've got like probably 80 or 100 journeys with all this mapped out, my prayers, my art, my post-journey integration, so I can legitimately show all the research I did on myself to prepare myself to do this work while also studying shamanism. And then my soul led me into a year of vegetarianism, and I was woken up every morning at 3:45 a.m. like clockwork, no matter how tired I was, and my soul said, get in your car, go to work, and I had rattles and drums and my ceremonial pipe, and I would do prayers, and my soul taught me chants, and my soul taught me different drum rhythms and different healing techniques for using rattles and drums to heal people, and stones and crystals and various stones. So for 1 year, I spent by the time I got to work, it was 4 o'clock, from 4 o'clock till about 8 o'clock in the morning doing meditation, Tai Chi. I did a year of Egyptian sun gazing every morning and every night, which my soul directed me to do. And then I did all these practices, and in these practices I would rattle or drum my way in with no psychedelics into very, very, I would be in different dimensions, and from different cultures would come sit with me and say, okay, if you get a patient with these kinds of problems, this is ways to handle it. And prior to that, I had years of experience conducting healing ceremonies in my holistic lifestyle coaching program with Dr. Cliff Oliver, who's a great musician and is a sound healer, and also doing them in my private practice, but not so much on a shamanic orientation, mostly tapping into that person's soul and asking for guidance and using tuning forks, Tibetan bowls, didgeridoo, flute. Dr. Oliver played the didgeridoo and the flute, drums, rattles, and I was having profound experiences with angels and all sorts of beings, and different soul guides from their own soul group would come. And so I worked with, and I began seeing people in the afterlife many, many years ago, just as a part of what happened to me as I grew spiritually. So what happened is I got developed to the level where I had a real good sense. When someone calls me on the phone, say they've been out in the jungle, as soon as they start talking to me, I can pick up their vibration, I can listen, and I can say, okay, I know roughly where you're at. Because those dimensions are fairly characteristic. Like the different hell realms, if you like read Dante or something like that, you can see that these structures are archetypal. They exist in all of our psyches. So they're going into different levels of the psyche. So when you're with that preface to sort of say, when you're in a journey and you've got stuff coming up like that and you've got all sorts of stuff, how you determine what's real? Well, guess what, Josh? It's all real. It's all real.
It's all real. Yeah.
Look, there's
and
nothing.
It feels that way.
There's nothing more real than your own internal perception, your own internal experience. Look, if I look at you and say, Josh, you're a handsome, intelligent young man, but on the inside you think you're unattractive and unintelligent and you're never going to be successful, it doesn't matter what I say, because your reality is your reality. And until I can somehow support you in changing your perception and seeing yourself and experiencing yourself in a different way, which I will not do until I address the programming that's led you to believe that, and the judgment that you've come to based on your own experiences, usually which has to do with relationships with other human beings and programming from childhood, then talking to you is just like talking to a wall. Mm-hmm. It's like telling a drug addict, you don't need those drugs. You just do that with Tai Chi and good food. And they look at you like, yeah, fuck, sure, tell me about it.
And what you're pointing at is this programming, literally almost like a cattle prod being imprinted into someone's soul. Like, this is who you are. And I've had so much profound experiences over the past year, since I met with you last year, actually, to really get down to who that Josh Trent really is.
That's right.
And what I found is that he's awesome. I love this guy.
And the other thing, too, is that all the things you went through to find that guy were just as real parts of you.
And painful.
And if you deny those parts of yourself, they don't heal. If you embrace those parts of yourself and you conceptually say, wow, like I've had clients that have murdered people. I've had clients that have had sex with animals and carry a lot of guilt with it. I've seen a lot in my career. I mean, I've seen a lot of really traumatized people. I've worked with lots of drug addicts and executives that are making millions a year that are drug addicts, and they're trying to keep that under the table. Money does not protect you from the challenges of life at all. Yeah. And people think because you got a lot of money, your life is easier. That's horseshit. That's just social silliness for uneducated people that don't know any better. But the point is that every single bit of that is paradoxically what God is. Isaiah 45:7. I create the light and the dark. I create good and evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. I quote that because that's one of the most profound passages in the Bible, and people that are Christian do not like it. In fact, in the last 25 years, they've been rewriting that passage so it doesn't say that. But of course, nobody rewrites the Bible. That's another fundamentalist Christian story. The point that I'm making is God is consciousness itself. What we call consciousness and what we call the pursuit of consciousness through science is completely misunderstood. that should be called conscious of. Josh is conscious of Paul Chek talking right now, but it's only because God is God and consciousness is the backdrop upon which conscious of can be experienced that Josh can hear me talking right now. In other words, the soul, I call the soul consciousness within. The soul is really God encapsulated in form. And because we each are unique expressions of the divine, we all have different bodies, we all have different ways of relating, we're all very unique and novel, and even identical twins can be very different in many different ways. So the tricky part of it is that, look, a simple analogy that I can use is when someone dies and they're in the hospital, well, the electrocardiogram flatlines, and it goes, and that means hurry the fuck up and shock this guy because he's dead. But the reality of it is when you're alive, your heart is beating, and so you see a positive, negative sine wave. Well, that's the flow of life. That's inhalation, exhalation. That's day, night. That's inside, outside. That's spring, summer, winter, fall. I mean, I could break this down lots and lots of ways. But basically what I'm saying here is that what we think of as thoughts or what we think of as personalities, those are the waves on the ocean of stillness that is reconciled all of that. It is the 0 point in quantum physics. It's the 0 point field out of which spontaneous emergence of quantum particles, which then become atomic, which then become structure, which become mountain, stars, planets, and people, all the things that can be weighed and measured. Everything in creation has a vibrational resonance. Every single thing can be measured and has vibrational resonance to it, from a subatomic particle, which can flash in and out of existence for a short time, to an atom, to a flower, to a child, to a human being, to a horse, to a dolphin, to a whale, to a planet. Look, our heart, the Schumann resonance, which is the frequency of the planet, is 7.83 hertz, which interestingly turns out to be exactly what shaman drum. They drum 4 beats a second, or 8 hertz, to bring you into entrainment or a hypnotic state. But what you don't realize is they're bringing you into entrainment with the consciousness of the whole planet. So the whole shamanic system is in frequency with the earth, which is a conscious living being, which we often refer to as our mother. Okay? So the point I'm making is that everything in existence is vibration that's dancing on the dance floor of that which is not moving, yet moving so fast it's everywhere and nowhere at the same time, which is called the absolute. The relative can only be experienced as a juxtaposition to the absolute. So the 0 point, or the flat line, is the source from which the absolute experiences itself in the relative. So everything that's happening is an expression of the divine, but it's like the waves on top of the ocean, but the absolute has no beginning and no end, and it's the eternal now. But the point I'm driving at is that anything that's moving, you can be conscious of. But if it's not moving, you can't be conscious of it. In fact, all I got to do is inject your eye muscles with a numbing agent and you'll go blind. I don't have to do anything to the eye itself, but the eye is constantly moving in what are called saccades. You can't feel anything unless there's vibration going through the system. Your entire sensor system, smell, touch, taste, hearing, all is based on vibrational sensation, all of which are nothing but frequencies that your nervous system codes and adds information and meaning to.
Oh, shit. There's a lot to unpack there, man.
Well,
I mean, there's so many concepts that are flowing together. And really what came from me is you said there is the eternal now.
The eternal now.
This is all about the eternal now.
Well, what I'm saying is that what we think of as mind, no matter how scary or how ugly it is all an expression of the divine. And the 0 point, the place of emergence of life itself, can't know itself unless it explores all of its own potentials.
Yeah.
That's why I quoted Isaiah 45:7. I create the light, that which you can be conscious of, the dark, the ocean from which it all emerges. I create good, that which you perceive in your own philosophy or mind as good, and evil, which is anything that you simply are afraid of or don't like.
I heard this concept on the show 3 years ago from Gay Hendricks. He said, dance with your fear.
Yes.
Actually dance with it.
Yeah.
Love your fear, he said. Love it.
Yes.
And at the time, I was not ready to receive that.
But most fear is, as Zig Ziglar says, false evidence appearing real.
Yeah.
Right? It's not legitimate fear.
Well, there's rational fear, and then there's irrational fear.
Well, there's programmed fear, and there's socially constructed fear. And then there's someone just let a rattlesnake into the room. Be careful.
That's real fear.
That's real fear. But most people think that ropes are rattlesnakes and believe it instead of going over and seeing if the rope is a rope or a snake. And that's just social conditioning. But the how this relates to this whole concept of the medicine journey, because I'm certainly not forgetting that, I'm simply saying that everything that you experience in a medicine ceremony is not only your personal trauma and your personal challenges and your personal joys and your personal highs, because all those are available, right? But you're also going into the collective unconscious. So you're actually accessing the experience of every living creature that's ever been on this planet and the planet itself as a living organism. And that is in the field of mind. And we are part of that. Just like a cork can't be separate from the ocean it's bobbling in. Well, we're like a little cork. First, we're aware of ourselves, and only 5% of the cork is sticking up out of the water like the tip of an iceberg, and that's the part we think that we're conscious with, but 95% of it's the stuff that makes our cells function and digests and eliminates food and metabolism and metabolizes and digests and grows and heals and allows us to do a fire walk, which should burn us, but our mind can overcome that. All of the stuff that happens below the radar, which, you're taking 25,900 breaths a day. Imagine trying to remember to breathe 25,900 times while driving your car and while taking jiu-jitsu lessons and while typing on your computer. There's 30 billion biochemical reactions a second in the human body. Your unconscious mind is capable of managing 30 billion biochemical reactions a second based on Nassim Haramehn's he's the one that stated that in one of his lectures on consciousness, and he studies that kind of stuff. I trust him. You've got 100 trillion cells in your body, each of which is made of 100 trillion atoms. That's a fucking lot of action, and your unconscious mind is orchestrating and managing all of that. Mm-hmm. What am I saying? I'm saying what we call consciousness is just a little tiny fuzz on top of a massive ocean, and when you take a psychedelic medicine, the periscope turns the other way. Now, instead of looking around at a bunch of little heads popping out of the water and go, oh, there's people here, you're going down into the vast expanse of not only your own personal experience and even the stuff before you were conscious, like a child. And most people's memory doesn't do well past about age 6, and that's based on a lot of scientific research. Some people say they can remember stuff from 3, but they might be just getting flashes. Mm-hmm. But below about 6, we're unconscious of a lot of our life. But we can have a lot of trauma. We can be witness to a lot of parental violence, and we can be sitting in church. And go to any movie that's showing violent movies, and it won't take you but 20 minutes, and someone will walk in with a little child, even though they're not supposed to be in there. And those children are downloading all of that rape and pillage and violence, and they don't know the difference if it's real or not. When you start taking medicines, all that stuff rises up. And it rises up as though it's as real as you laying there on the ground or anything you've ever experienced. And that's what I meant. Perception is reality. So if someone doesn't teach you how to process that and how to convert that into meaning, and the other thing is that whenever you're in that state, you're in a dream state. Nothing in dreams communicate in direct reality. They're all communicating symbolically. So, for example, if somebody has is on medicines, and all of a sudden they find themselves scared to death running from somebody inside of a house, and they're running from a being that's made of darkness that has no facial features. Well, in dream symbology, everything in the dream relates to you. So everything in the dream has something to do with you. The dark person with no face is your unconscious. It's the part of yourself you're unconscious. That's why it has no face. We recognize people by their faces. I see that face and I go, that's Josh Trent every time. Unless he's got a twin brother who can do Josh Trent really well. So when we get down into the unconscious, we are now basically dealing with the whole sea of our life experience, but not only our life, all the lives. And if you go past that, you can get into the cosmic unconscious.
And past lives as well.
Yes, I've been through many of them, not only by having a regressionist work on me, but going through them specifically in ceremony and out of ceremony, just to find out, well, who the hell am I really and why am I here?
This is why it's so important to have a captain in the ocean. All these seas you're talking about.
Absolutely, that's it.
We have to have a captain.
And
there's no way around it.
The seas get high. And you know what? You can't tell by, if I put 100 people in front of you that range from fat people with pimples to the healthiest, most beautiful Gabrielle Reese-looking athletes, there's not one iota of indicator by just looking at them, meeting them, and shaking their hand, unless you have the kind of abilities that people like me have developed, which is reading energy fields and accessing who that person is through soul connection and using, spiritual skills. But my point is that just because someone makes a lot of money, drives a nice car, and keeps their house clean and abides by the law is no indicator of what's in Pandora's box, because not only are you opening up the person this time, you're opening up all their past lives. And depending on the setting, depending on the medicine, and depending on what their soul feels they're ready to experience, the combination of those events can create quite a wild experience. And I have been beaten, I have been scratched, I have been vomited all over, I have been shit on, I have been yelled at for hours at a time, people screaming, stop it, make it go away, because people don't want to deal with what's inside of them. They actually come to these shamanic ceremonies going, oh man, we're going to have such a good time.
This is not going to be fun.
This is going to be a great party. I'm like, oh, you have no fucking idea.
You have no idea. Now, and we can go to such depth in this, Paul. It's like, what an incredible journey you've taken me on and everyone listening on. And now I'm thinking, once we go to this depth and we decide that we've done the work to prepare for this depth, there's stuff that we can do every day.
That's the point,
there's stuff
though.
That we can do every single day.
The medicine, look, there's something that I just have to say. The medicines do not give you these visions. Yes, the medicines open you up, and the medicines can bring certain gifts to you. People see large snakes on ayahuasca quite a lot, or jaguars, because first of all, the medicine comes from areas where those animals interact with the plants, and the animals and the plants are in a family relationship. So if you look inside of my head, you're going to see my brothers and sisters and mom and dad in there. If you look inside the Banisteris carpi and the Paganum harmalina, well, you're going to see they have a relationship with everything, and those are the things you're having because they're part of the psyche or the soul of those very organisms. If you have a mushroom experience, you're going to see different things, and mushrooms have a different approach. Each medicine has a unique sort of psychic energy and consciousness of its own, okay? So the key thing to remember is that all psychedelic medicines are amplifiers. They only amplify what's already inside of you.
Yeah.
So you take 3 hits of LSD, it's like turning the volume up really loud. And in fact, now everything you've never heard before that you've been stuffing down starts becoming very vocal.
This is an amplifier.
It's an amplifier.
But then before that, and I have to interrupt you here because I'm thinking about the way that we've gone here, and I understand, and you understand from so many years of work, there are these doctors, there are these ways in which people can prepare themselves for medicine, where it doesn't necessarily mean they need to go to the deep end. Let's talk about the doctors a little bit.
Which doctors?
The 4.
Oh, my 4 doctors.
Your 4.
Yeah, okay, so I just want to finish that previous thought, though, so I don't lose the train and so I can bring it to a conclusion. So the point is all medicines are amplifiers, and the dose determines how far the volume knob goes up and how deep into it goes. So remember I said you turn the periscope down? Well, 1 hit of LSD is 5 feet under the water. 2, it's 25 feet. 3, it's 50 feet. 4, you're going to see dragons down there and shit that National Geographic hasn't even shown you yet.
Yes.
You keep going, and you're going to meet the creative forces behind the planet and the universe itself, and the forces will be so strong that it can tear your psyche to pieces because you're actually interacting with those forces consciously now. You're aware of what's happening down there. So whatever's inside of you just gets turned up because you can't see it otherwise. What's the difference between that and using a magnifying glass to read fine print? You can't see it normally. You look through a big magnifying glass and, oh, it says, danger, do not give to children. Oh, shit, I just gave that to my kid. Fuck. Okay, so the medicines allow us to see deeply into ourselves. The experiences that we have, like, I really realize I can love my wife a lot better. I really realize that I need to work less. You know, when one of the things that happened to me when I started doing medicines, I could feel Paul Jr.'s pain because his father was so focused on his career and so focused on making something of himself that I had justified that because I knew I needed to put food on the table and give him a good education, and I wanted to give him the things that I didn't get as a kid, like a family that had some money and parents that weren't fighting all the time. But the medicine said to me, now you know where your son is wounded. Have empathy for yourself because you did the best you could do. Have empathy for him. He's doing the best that he could do. But it's never too late to start that healing process. So the medicines don't fix things. They bring things into awareness. They make connections. They get neural pathways going. But you have to walk through the door. A medicine plants a seed, but you have to fertilize it, and you have to water it, and you have to trim it, and you have to protect it every day, or you have just gotten high or had a bad trip, but you haven't had a spiritual experience. You have not entered the world of spiritual practice or true spirituality. So the key point I want to close that concept with is medicines don't fix you. They illuminate where the healing is, and they show you what the possibilities are, but you have to walk through the door, and you have to become that person every day. And to the degree that you don't have the spiritual strength or courage to depart from the old you to become the new you, which is often very challenging because many people realize, for example, they don't want to be Christians, or that they don't want to stay in the marriage they've been in for 10 years because they know it's not healthy for them or their kids. So they go home and get a divorce, or they leave the church, and then they get attacked. That's where you have to be clear about who you are. That's where you have to have the discipline to stay on track, and that's what drives you deeper into prayer and deeper into connection and communion, and it's what helps you reach out to other people in the community that are at your level, that will support you, because they're the only ones that understand what you're going through.
And they're loving and accepting the new you, because the new you is going to cost you the old one.
You have to let the old one die. It's going to cost you
the old one.
That snake has to shed its skin.
And that can be the most painful of all. It's letting go of the old self.
Of course it is, because you go through a period of not knowing who you are anymore.
Which is fucking terrifying sometimes.
It is very terrifying. I've been through it several times. And the other thing is the medicines I find typically leave you open for about 3 months after a ceremony. So for about 3 months is as though you're very porous to other dimensions. And so one of the things that's very dangerous is if you do medicine ceremonies too frequently, you can get so open that you can't determine what's real anymore, and you can have so many voices in your head and
it's such a solid point.
So many gods or so many perceptible souls that you're just totally fucking confused. And you know, I was able to do that because I have a very strong ego. I was raised in a very violent family where I had to learn to defend myself. I was a motocross racer, a stock car driver, a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division. I've done a lot of very intense things where I had to have laser focus and could not let go of the wheel, metaphorically. I had to stay in the game until it was either death or I made it through it. So somebody with that kind, like a Danny Way, for example. Danny's solid as a rock on the medicines because he has faced the devil 1,000 times, right? He knows how to deal with anything scary and get through it. So someone like that can do journeys more frequently because they have a very strong sense of who they are, and they have a sense of how to navigate choppy waters in many areas of their life. But most of the people running out there are just little children in 20-something-year-old bodies or 30-something-year-old bodies that still rely on mommy and daddy's approval and are still trying to look good and be what everybody else wants them to be. And you throw somebody like that into a situation where they're going journey to journey to journey,
yes,
and it'll just blow them to pieces. And the next thing you know, they're in a psych ward, and I've seen it happen 20 or 30 times.
This is why the medicine calls people. I don't think, and I'd love to hear what you say to this before we talk about the doctors and always wrap up. People don't call themselves to the medicine. That's the ego wanting some kind of challenge. Medicine calls people. Don't you feel that's true?
I think it's both ways, because really the people and the medicine are really extensions of the same thing. It's all God. Your whole entire visceral system works on the laws of plant physiology. That's why when people used to be brain injured, they called them a vegetable, because you're now at the level of the autonomic nervous system, which is vegetative. So your liver, your heart, your kidney, those are all law on the principles of the vegetable system. And that's how we connect with plants, because we have plants inside of us that operate in the same concepts and frequencies. And we have soil inside of us. We have water. We carry a farm. We're a walking garden. So the point I'm making is that the part of us, remember, we have like 18% of the same DNA as a daisy, and we've got 23% of the fruit genes of a fruit fly, and everything is in a human being. Everything out there is inside of you, and your DNA is an antenna that's tapping you into this stuff constantly. So the point I'm making is the plant kingdom calls to us because it sees and feels our pain, and it has a broader perspective than we do. And we also call to the plant kingdom because whenever we need help, our salvation is its salvation. All you got to do is look at how destructive people are to nature.
Yeah.
So nature as a whole is a living organism that recognizes that we are part of it, but that we're children that are wounded and lost and confused, and Mother Earth absorbs the trauma of her children going through puberty. So there's if you take the Tai Chi symbol, you could say the black represents the plant and the animal kingdom, and the white represents the human consciousness. Well, one needs the other. They can't exist without each other. We are really the tip of the evolutionary sword in this dimension of reality, in this space-time domain. So we're calling to each other, is what I'm saying. My 4-doctor system is a way to categorize consciousness and the life experience into 4 key categories that you cannot ignore, because if you ignore any one of them, you'll make so many mistakes it can lead to a very miserable existence. So Dr. Happiness is the domain of mind, and that is, what are my values? If you don't have any values, I say your yes has no value till you learn to say no. So for example, my value is I do my very best to only support organic farming and organic food, because if I put money into commercial anything, I'm actually funding the destruction of the planet, the deterioration of the soils, and the chemicalization of the planet. And those corporations live off our purchases. That's the food they eat, the air they breathe. So there's Dr. Happy. So each of the other doctors represents values. What are my values around movement? Dr. Movement. What are my values around diet and how I'm going to feed myself? And what are the implications of my choices? And what are my values around rest and how I use rest to get the best out of me? Dr. Happy manages the choices with regard to what is happy making for me and what am I willing to do to create happiness in my life. So there's Dr. Happy straight on. How does movement play into my health, vitality, and happiness? So there's your values around movement. How does eating and caring for my body through the use of food and water play into my well-being and accomplishing my dream goal or objective? So there's your values around diet. And then what are my values about getting to bed and using the science of rest effectively with exercise, resting myself from entangled relationships? Anywhere the concept of rest is involved has to be conscious as a value. So anyone that is dealing with life. You can't be healthy with 3 doctors. If you know what makes you happy, and you like to exercise and you eat well, but you are ignorant about rest and you keep staying up late at night, you'll burn yourself out. Mm-hmm. If you know about happiness and rest and eating, but you don't know how to move your body, you'll set yourself up for a lot of problems. There's no such thing as a 3-doctor man that's holistic.
Right. And these 4 doctors came from this 30-plus year career that you've drove for the past 3 decades. I mean, these principles, before somebody does medicine, these principles are fundamental to all human beings.
Those are the principles you have to have, because if you mismanage any of those things, it creates stress that you're going to confront in the journey.
Well, damn it, Paul, we got to do a podcast on the 4 doctors the next time we hang out, because we went deep into the medicine, my friend, this time, which I love connecting with you so much.
Thank you, me too.
I love the roundabouts you go on. And honestly, man, I love giving you space as an elder. I told you this last year at your house.
I'm getting old.
No, you truly are a voice of an elder wisdom for people in the wellness industry, people in the health industry. I think we all feel that from you. And just hell yes, Paul Chek. Thank you for coming on the show. Thanks for being here with me in Austin. And next time we'll do a show a little bit deeper on the 4 doctors.
Yeah, man. Love to. When you're about to interview a 4-doctor master right over there, Mike Salemi, he's by far one of the most evolved 4-doctor managers I've ever worked with. So you've surrounded yourself with 4-doctor beings. So and it's, I appreciate being identified as an elder, because I wish when I was a young man I had somebody that I could go talk to about anything without being judged, and without being told, oh, you're going to fuck yourself up, all this shit that people say to people because they're really just afraid of living. And my dream is that young people have a chance to really fully experience life. And, life can be very dangerous and very scary, but if somebody gives you awareness of how to manage yourself, like imagine some teenager who's surfed a couple weeks hears that there's a monsoon coming, and just because he saw Laird Hamilton surfing a 100-foot wave, he thinks, well, if Laird can do it, I can do it. And the next thing you know, he's drowned and he's dead, right? Well, my point is, if Laird Hamilton lived in town and he ran to Laird would said, young man, give it 10 years.
Let's do some work first.
And let's get you to a 10-footer and a 20-footer. Because the chances are when you're about halfway up the face of that wave, you're going to shit yourself. And you're going to realize, I'm in deep trouble. And the problem is, a wave that big will hold you under longer than you can hold your breath for. So you're probably going to die in there. Because when you're on a wave that big, you can't afford to fall off. And so there you see the function of an elder. But a Laird Hamilton would not say, don't surf big waves. He would say, surf the waves that you can surf and that are safe to fall on and get hit by until you develop the skills that you can survive these bigger waves. And that's why I say to young people, if you're fooling around with psychedelic drugs or any kind of drugs, you better start with small waves so at least you know what's going to happen to you. But what do? They go and take a massive dose of something because their friend did. And so now you just get silliness on top of silliness, and that ends up being emergency room visits, death, and broken-hearted families, and then people are tracking the drugs. But really, drugs don't do anything. We make those choices. So it doesn't matter what it is. It's just really, do we have wise guidance and people that have enough life experience and common sense to guide people effectively? And I think that's what your podcast is for. That's what every podcast that I know of is for, even people like Joe Rogan and all the great ones.
This is always meant to me, and this is how we'll say goodbye, is this concept of intelligence.
Yeah.
Intelligence, it's about gathering. It's about applying.
Yeah.
It's also about embodying.
Oh, yeah.
And so we learn from people who have done the embodying so that we can do better embodying ourselves. Paul Chek, thank you, man.
Thank you. Disembodied intelligence is no good to anybody.
That's right. Let's embody, baby. Let's have fun, too. While we do
That's what I've been doing.
That's what we do. We're out. Thank you, Paul Chek, for coming on the show.
Thanks, buddy.